Matthew 14:13 through 14. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. This is still where we are today. The people of this world are indeed in need of Jesus, and he has compassion on all of them. Where do we stand, though, as the body of believers? If you're like me, you may be in the same place the disciples were. Matthew 14:15. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." The disciples bring up to Jesus 3 problems. 1, the place was desolate or deserted. 2, the day was over, it was already late. And 3, they needed to send the people away so they could find their own food. They say the place is deserted. Your desolate place may not be a geographical desert like the physical place the disciples were in. It may be a desolate state of mind, like, I'm depleted. What resources do I even have to give someone else? Our church is too small to take on this task. I just don't know how to solve anyone else's problems. My spiritual gifts aren't big enough to be able to benefit them. Do you feel like you're in a desolate place? If so, why? Let me know in the comments. The second thing the disciples say is, the day is now over. Your thoughts on the timing may not be the actual time on the clock. But are you seeing a situation and thinking thoughts like, that person or situation is too far gone to be helped now. It's too late for me to make a difference in this situation. What good would it do if I offered help now anyway? I'm tired. I've already tried. It's not my problem anymore. And do you feel like the day is now over in a situation or person? If so, why? The third thing the disciples say is, send the crowds away so they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves. This one is probably the most convicting to me. What they wanted was for the people to be sent away, and their excuse to God was so that the people could fend for themselves. They tried to make it sound good, but the heart posture of not wanting to be bothered with the needs of the people was on full display. You may not be asking God to physically send people away from his presence, but are you thinking things like, they don't deserve God? Or, God punished them. They're not as worthy as I am. I am not willing to be the salt and light for them anymore. I shouldn't be responsible for showing them the love of Christ. Or 5, I'm staying here with Jesus. You go away and deal with your issues. Is there someone or some cause that you have sent away and left to fend for itself? What are your intentions when it comes to helping others? Do you offer the gospel through your actions and show people Jesus? Or do you send them off to worldly resources to get their needs met? Do you suggest to God that he sends someone away and abandon them because all you can see is your desolation and your day is now over? When you don't take the time to give the gospel in word and action to people, we leave them to their own understanding on what they need to nourish themselves, instead of pointing them to Jesus, who is the bread of life and the living water. Everything the disciples pointed out would have been valid and a great evaluation of the situation. The mistake they made, however, is the same mistake we make today. They forgot they were talking to God. Jesus was not about to entertain their suggestion at all. While his disciples only saw what they lack, Jesus, being the good teacher, says something to them that should be just as startling to all of us. Matthew 14:16. But Jesus said, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. I don't know about you, but I can picture half the disciples' eyes getting wide in shock, thinking, how does he expect us to do that? The other half of the disciples, I picture looking at him in confusion, thinking Jesus had lost his mind. If that were true, I'd definitely be in the first group. Jesus checks their hearts in a very to-the-point way when he says they don't need to go away. Sending people away from God will never be the correct response to anyone's situation. Jesus then tells the disciples that they have a responsibility in this situation to give them something to eat. The disciples responded again with their clear lack of resources on their minds. Matthew 14:17, they said to him, "We only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish." To be honest, I have said this to Jesus also when he has commanded me to serve others. "How, Jesus? I have a husband and 3 kids. We live off 1 income. I'm already trying to stretch our dollars. We're barely able to save. I'm making things from scratch and we're doing things ourselves. Sometimes I feel like we're just making it, Lord. How am I supposed to help anybody else?" Through the 4 gospel accounts of this passage, I notice different tones in their statements, which I want to paraphrase for us here. Matthew 14:17 seems to say, "Look at my lack, Lord. How do you expect me to help?" Mark 6:37, I hear, "Should I use everything I have and have worked so hard for and give it to them?" Luke 9:13, I read as, "Your command doesn't make sense. You really don't expect us to go and buy food for all these people." And John 6:7, Philip gives me the impression of, even if I had abundance, it still wouldn't be enough to address this massive of a need. Each witness's account to the story echoes the other. The disciples were in agreement that this need of the people was not their problem, and these people needed to go away. Jesus' response to them in all 4 gospels echoes too. He hears what they said. He is well aware of what they have, both in financial ability and tangible resources. Is in fact not enough to meet the enormous need. Without him, the disciples would have been right. The people would need to go away and fend for themselves. Jesus responds to them in Matthew 14:18, and he said, "Bring them here to me." How simple. All the protests and excuses seem foolish by just these 5 words spoken by our God. How could we forget that he is our source? How could we forget that he is not just our source, but he is the source of all things? Do we not believe that he is powerful enough to supply the needs of those around us? Do we think God only has enough for us? Or worse, do we think God just isn't enough? Do you fear that you will lack even more if he gives to others? I'll leave you with that, and we'll head on over to part 3.